At first, Kiara didn't understand what the woman was saying. But as the woman continued speaking, using vague and suggestive words, an unsettling feeling began to creep into Kiara's mind. Kiara was a child, but she wasn't so naive as to not grasp the woman's intentions. "No, I can't do that," Kiara shouted, tears streaming down her face. She turned and ran away, ignoring the woman's calls behind her. Atlanta, the vibrant capital of Georgia, with its skyscrapers gleaming under the southern sunshine and an endless rhythm of life, is where millions of dreams have been nurtured. But for 8-year-old Kiara, Atlanta was not the place of dreams. It was where her nightmare began. On a cool October evening, as the lights of downtown Atlanta shone brightly, Kiara's parents took her to celebrate their wedding anniversary. It was one of those moments when Kiara felt enveloped by love. They laughed together in their old car, singing along to a familiar song on the radio. Sitting in the back seat, Kiara hummed along to the tune her mother often sang to her before bed. She had no idea it would be the last time her little family would be together. In just a moment, everything changed. A speeding truck lost control, a deafening crash. Kiara's world shattered in an instant. When she woke up in the hospital, unfamiliar faces surrounded her. The only question in her mind was, "Where are my parents?" But the only answers she received were pitying glances and silent shakes of the head. After the funeral, the adults in the family decided that Kiara would live with her uncle and aunt in the suburbs of Atlanta, a quieter area about a 20-minute drive from the city centre. For a little girl who had lost everything, it was a glimmer of hope. She believed that even without her parents, her uncle and aunt would love and care for her. But the bitter truth quickly revealed itself. Their house was nothing like the warm home she had once known. Gone were the family dinners filled with the aroma of her mother's baked goods. Gone were her father's laughter as he lifted her onto his shoulders and called her his little princess. Instead, this house was cold, not because it lacked heating, but because it lacked warmth and care. Kiara's uncle, a quiet and gruff man, saw her as a burden. Her aunt, a woman with a constant frown, never looked at her with the warm, loving gaze her mother once had. Day by day, they stripped away everything Kiara once called her own. From the old teddy bear she hugged every night to the worn family photos that held a world of memories for her. "We don't have room for these things," her aunt said as she removed all of Kiara's belongings from the room. Kiara just stood there, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to protest, but the voice of an 8-year-old was too small in this household. Every night, she curled up on the stiff mattress, longing for the feeling of being wrapped in her parents' embrace, remembering her mother's gentle lullabies. But those memories now felt like distant dreams. The hope that her uncle and aunt would love her soon turned into disappointment. Cold words and disdainful glances became her daily reality. Then, one freezing winter morning, as Kiara tried to keep warm in her father's old coat, her uncle called her into the living room. "Kiara, we can't keep you here anymore," he said, his eyes avoiding hers entirely. "You're on your own. This isn't your home." Those words hit Kiara like a punch to her fragile heart. She couldn't understand how grown-ups, the ones meant to protect her, could be so cold. She wanted to scream, to beg, but she knew all efforts would be in vain. With only a small bag containing a few pieces of clothing and a thin coat, Kiara stepped out of the white-painted wooden door. She stood still in the front yard, gazing at the road leading to downtown Atlanta. Not a single tear fell. Her heart felt frozen. Before Kiara lay a long road, an uncertain future, but deep within her sorrowful 8-year-old eyes, there was a faint glimmer of hope, a tiny spark that somewhere in this vast city someone might reach out to her, offering her a chance to live again. Atlanta, the city of dreams, was now the place where Kiara had to begin her journey to rediscover herself. Marietta, a quiet town less than 20 miles from Atlanta, is famous for its red brick streets and old Southern-style houses. But for Kiara, this place felt nothing like home. After the sudden death of her parents, she was sent here to live with her uncle and aunt, the only family she had left. Yet instead of love and care, what Kiara received was coldness and distance. Their house, a 2-story building with a white-painted facade and a small garden, looked lovely from the outside. But inside, the atmosphere was icy. Not because of a lack of heating, but because of the indifference and lack of affection from those who lived there. Kiara's uncle, a man with a cold stare and curt demeanour, hardly spoke to her. Her aunt, always busy with her tasks, never lifted her head to look at the little girl, treating Kiara as nothing more than an unwanted burden left at their door. At first, Kiara tried to stay hopeful. Maybe they'll be kinder if I behave, she told herself. But as days passed, her efforts were met with nothing but disregard. Kiara, stop wandering around in the kitchen, you're just getting in my way, her aunt snapped every time Kiara tried to help. You should learn to take care of yourself. No one has time to look after you, her uncle said, his eyes never leaving the morning newspaper. Every word, every glance, felt like a dagger piercing the fragile heart of the little girl. Kiara began to realize that this house was far from a place she could call home, but the worst was yet to come. One day her aunt entered Kiara's room with an irritated expression. In her hand was a bag. I don't understand why we have to keep all of this. None of it means anything, her aunt said coldly. One by one, she pulled out the remaining belongings Kiara had left, a floral dress her mother had bought her, the stuffed bear she clutched every night, and the faded family photos that carried the weight of all her memories. These small items were all Kiara had to remind her of her past life. But her aunt, without a moment's hesitation, threw them all into the trash bag. Auntie, please, don't throw those away, Kiara cried out, tears streaming down her face. That's enough. Stop bothering me, Kiara. This is my house and I'll decide what stays, her aunt snapped. Kiara could only stand there, helplessly watching as fragments of her memories were taken away, as if pieces of her very self were being erased. That night, after her room was completely emptied, Kiara curled up on the bed, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, and silently cried herself to sleep. In the days that followed, things only got worse. Her uncle and aunt grew increasingly distant. They barely spoke to her and excluded her from any family activities. Kiara lived like a shadow, quietly moving from one room to another, trying her best not to make a sound. Then, on a bitterly cold winter morning, as weak sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick fog outside, Kiara was called to the living room. She descended the stairs, her small legs trembling as she feared what awaited her. Her uncle stood there, hands in his coat pockets, his expression completely devoid of emotion. Kiara, we can't keep you here anymore, he said, his tone calm, as if he were discussing something of no significance. But I have nowhere to go, Kiara stammered, her heart tightening painfully. That's not our problem, he replied, not even bothering to look her in the eye. You'll have to figure it out on your own. Without waiting for her to say another word, he opened the front door. A frigid gust of air swept into the room, carrying with it a biting cold that chilled her to the bone. He pointed outside, signaling that she had to leave. Kiara stood there, her tear-filled eyes fixed on him. She wanted to say something, to plead, but she knew it wouldn't make a difference. Clutching the thin coat wrapped around her, she stepped out of the house, feeling as though her heart had shattered into pieces. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing in Kiara's mind like a sentence of condemnation. The 8-year-old now stood on the brick-paved road, with nowhere to go and no one to call family. But no matter how much it hurt, Kiara did not cry. Her aunt and uncle's coldness had dried up her tears. Instead, she lifted her head, looking toward the horizon of Marietta. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she couldn't stop moving forward. Atlanta, with its distant skyscrapers, seemed to beckon her. Maybe someone there will hear me, she thought, as her small feet began to step forward on the chilly road. That was the first moment in Kiara's arduous journey, a journey to find a true home and a life she could truly call her own. On the bus heading to Chicago, Kiara sat quietly by the window, her eyes fixed on the endless roads stretching ahead. This city was a symbol of opportunity, a place where towering skyscrapers stood tall and where her mother had once spoken of lively neighborhoods filled with laughter and music. But for an 8-year-old child, completely alone, Chicago was not a dream. It was a maze without an exit. When the bus came to its final stop on the south side of the city, Kiara stepped off with a small bag and a heavy heart. The icy winds blowing in from Lake Michigan cut through her skin, making her shiver. No one looked at her, no one cared about the small girl huddled on the sidewalk. She began to walk, without a destination, and no idea what to do next. Chicago was bustling but chaotic. The blaring car horns, the shouts of people on the streets, and other unfamiliar sounds made Kiara feel more lost and isolated than ever. After hours of wandering through the streets, Kiara's small legs grew weary. She looked around, hoping to find a place to rest. Her eyes settled on an abandoned building tucked away in a narrow alley. Its peeling walls, shattered windows, and the darkness within made it look ominous, but it was the only place Kiara could call home at that moment. She stepped inside, her feet crunching on broken glass and rotting wood. The air was as cold as her heart felt at that moment. Kiara found a small corner curled up tightly, hugging her knees to keep warm. She closed her eyes, but sleep refused to come. The nights in the abandoned building were long and frightening. Police sirens wailed endlessly in the distance, their blue and red lights flickering through the shattered windows. Strange footsteps echoed in the hallway, and eerie noises jolted Kiara awake every time she tried to close her eyes. The chill from the concrete floor seeped through Kiara's thin clothes, making her shiver uncontrollably. The gnawing hunger in her stomach only made everything more unbearable. She had nothing to eat except for a few crumbs of bread she had picked up along the way. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the loneliness. In the darkness of the abandoned building, Kiara felt like she was the last person left in the world. There was no one to hold her, no one to talk to. Only the echo of her own breathing and the heavy weight of her thoughts kept her company. During the day, Kiara left the building to wander the streets in search of food. She rummaged through trash bins in alleyways, scavenging for leftovers discarded by others. She learned to avoid the curious eyes of adults, blending into the crowds so no one would notice she was just a homeless child. Sometimes, she would see families in the park, parents playing with their children. Watching those children laugh in their parents' arms was like a punch to Kiara's chest. She couldn't help but think of the happy days she had spent with her own parents, but now those memories only brought her more pain. One day, as Kiara sat in the dark corner of the abandoned building, a group of strangers entered. They spoke loudly, laughing and joking, paying no attention to her. Kiara held her breath, desperately hoping they wouldn't notice her, but fear gripped her, and every sound they made caused her to flinch. Fortunately, after a while, the group left without realizing she was there. Yet from that day on, Kiara knew that even this building was not safe. Despite the harshness of her life, Kiara held on to a sliver of hope in her heart. She remembered her mother's words. "Kiara, you're stronger than you think. As long as you don't give up, you'll find the light." Those words became the driving force that kept her going. Every morning she left the building determined to find a better life. But at just 8 years old, with small hands and a heart full of fear, she understood that the journey ahead would be full of challenges. Chicago, the city of opportunities, seemed to challenge her with every step. Yet Kiara, small and fragile as she was, kept moving forward, step by step, with the hope that somewhere in this vast city, someone would reach out to help her. And with each passing day, the fear in her heart slowly transformed into strength. Strength to overcome adversity. Strength to rediscover the light she once thought had been lost forever. Kiara's days in Chicago passed in hunger and exhaustion. Patchwork meals made from scraps of food, scavenged from trash bins, or crumbs of bread offered by the fleeting kindness of strangers could never fill her growling stomach. Each morning she left her temporary shelter to wander the streets, hoping to find something, anything to eat. One day, as Kiara lingered near a small market in the southern part of the city, her eyes landed on a fruit stall. The bright red apples were displayed enticingly, as if calling out to her, but she dared not get too close. The shopkeepers in this area were always vigilant, and she knew that if she were caught sneaking around, there would be trouble. She stood at a distance, observing, clutching her tattered coat tightly around herself. The cold December wind cut through the air, making her small body tremble. Just then, a voice spoke from behind her. "Little one, you look tired." Kiara turned around, startled. Standing before her was a middle-aged woman with an air of sophistication. She wore an expensive fur coat, her lips painted a striking red, smiling faintly while her eyes seemed to study Kiara from head to toe. "How long have you been wandering out here?" the woman asked, her voice sweet yet carrying a tone that made Kiara uneasy. I'm just looking for some food," Kiara stammered, her eyes dropping to her worn-out, tattered shoes. The woman smiled, her eyes lighting up as if a thought had struck her. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a sandwich. "Take this. You need to eat something. You look like you can't take it anymore." Kiara eyed the sandwich, the hunger evident on her face. She hesitated for a moment, then quickly grabbed it, thanking the woman profusely. "It's nothing, little one," the woman said, her tone now softer. "I can help you with much more than this, but you'll have to do it my way." Kiara looked at her, curiosity mixed with apprehension shining in her eyes. "What way?" The woman sat down, her expression growing more serious. "You see, this world isn't an easy place. If you want to survive, you have to be strong. I know a way for you to make money. Enough so you'll never have to be hungry or sleep on the streets again." At first, Kiara didn't understand what the woman was implying, but as she continued to speak, using vague but suggestive words, an uneasy feeling began to creep into Kiara's mind. She was a child, but she wasn't so naive as to miss the woman's intentions. "No, I can't do that!" Kiara screamed, tears streaming down her face. She turned and ran, ignoring the woman's calls after her. As she sprinted through the dark alleys of Chicago, Kiara felt as if her heart was about to leap out of her chest. She couldn't believe someone would suggest such a thing to a child like her. She ran until her small legs gave out, collapsing in a hidden corner of the abandoned building she called her shelter. Curling up in the shadows, Kiara sobbed uncontrollably. She was terrified, not just by the woman's horrifying proposal, but by the harsh truth that the world was so cruel to her. But amidst her fear, a new resolve began to grow. Kiara knew she couldn't continue living like this forever. She had to find a way to escape life on the streets, but not by following the path the woman had suggested. Kiara decided that no matter how hard it was, she wouldn't lose herself. In the days that followed, Kiara made a conscious effort to avoid the marketplace and any places where she might encounter the woman again. She returned to the park areas where passers-by often left scraps of food or offered her something to eat out of pity. One morning, as the pale sunlight filtered through Chicago's towering buildings, Kiara sat on a wooden bench in a small park. A middle-aged man, dressed in a long coat and carrying a bag, stopped in front of her. "Would you like something to eat?" he asked, his voice warm and gentle. Kiara looked up, her eyes still filled with doubt, but when she saw the genuine smile on his face, she felt a small sense of reassurance. "Yes, I'm very hungry," she replied softly. The man handed her a box of food and then sat on the bench beside her. He didn't ask many questions or say much. He simply sat quietly as she ate. For the first time in a long while, Kiara felt a flicker of warmth she hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. Even though her life was still filled with challenges, that moment made Kiara realize that there were still good people in the world, and even though it was small, that glimmer of hope gave her the strength to keep moving forward on her difficult journey. That night, the Chicago sky was pitch black, not a single star in sight. The cold wind from Lake Michigan howled through the dark alleys, seeping into every crack and crevice of the abandoned building. In the darkest corner of the ground floor, Kiara curled up on the icy concrete floor. She tried to close her eyes, but sleep eluded her, replaced by the creeping tendrils of fear winding through her mind. Even the smallest sounds from outside, the distant echo of footsteps, the crunch of broken glass, made her heart race. Kiara forced herself to remain still, whispering to herself that as long as she didn't draw attention, the world outside would leave her alone. But that night, the world refused to grant her peace. The sound of footsteps echoed through the stillness of the building. At first, Kiara thought it was just a distant noise carried by the wind, but as the sound grew clearer, she realized someone was coming inside. Her eyes snapped open, but the thick darkness made it impossible to see anything. Then, faintly illuminated by the dim light of a street lamp shining through a broken window, two silhouettes emerged. They were two rugged-looking men, their heavy footsteps echoing on the concrete floor as they moved closer to the corner where Kiara lay. Each step reverberated like a warning bell in her mind. She froze. Her entire body was paralyzed with fear. She wanted to hide, to run, but her legs refused to move. One of the men crouched down, his rough hand reaching out to touch her trembling arm. "Well, look what we have here," he murmured, his voice low and accompanied by a sinister chuckle. Kiara's heart pounded violently, as though it were about to burst out of her chest. Her breathing quickened, but no sound escaped her throat. Just when Kiara thought it was all over, a strong voice broke through the tension from behind them. "Don't do that. She's just a kid." It was the other man, his tone firm and filled with conviction. He grabbed his companion by the shoulder and yanked him away forcefully. "Are you crazy?" he snapped. "We're not the kind of people who do things like this." After a moment of tension, the two men stood silently, staring at each other. Finally, the other man let go and stepped back, muttering something under his breath before walking away with his companion. Their footsteps grew fainter, leaving Kiara in complete silence, except for the thunderous pounding of her heart. Kiara remained motionless, too terrified to move, even after the shadows of the two men had disappeared. She trembled, not from the cold of the concrete floor, but from the fear that had just engulfed her. Her eyes welled up with tears, but none fell. She felt as if she had narrowly escaped the grasp of death itself, yet the lingering terror clung to her, refusing to release its hold. All night, Kiara couldn't sleep. Every little sound made her flinch. She curled herself into an even smaller ball, as if trying to blend into the darkness so that no one could find her. When the first light of dawn filtered through the shattered window, Kiara sat up, her gaze vacant as she stared into the void. The events of the previous night had not only stolen what little peace she had left, but it had also stripped her of the faint hope that this place could ever be a refuge. She knew she couldn't stay here another night. This building was no longer a shelter. It had become a trap. If she didn't leave, next time, she might not be so lucky. Kiara stood up, her legs still trembling, but her gaze now carried a newfound determination. She had to leave. She had to find somewhere safer. But where? She had no idea. Her mind suddenly flashed to the image of the woman who had given her a sandwich a few weeks ago. Although the woman's earlier proposition had terrified her, Kiara couldn't completely dismiss the possibility that she might be willing to help her again. "Maybe she'll let me stay. Just for a little while," she whispered to herself, her voice a mix of hope and fear. As Kiara stepped out of the abandoned building, the daylight illuminated her small face, revealing her exhaustion, but also a glimmer of hope. She didn't know what awaited her ahead, but one thing she was certain of: she had to keep moving, no matter how dangerous the world outside might be. Her small feet began to tread the cracked sidewalks of Chicago, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and busy people who never looked back. Her journey was still far from over, and darkness could lurk around any corner. Yet Kiara, trembling and fragile as she was, refused to stop, because she knew that as long as she kept walking one day, the light would find her. As the pale morning sunlight streamed through the broken windows of the abandoned building, Kiara knew she couldn't stay there another night. The previous night had stripped away the last shred of safety the place had once offered. The echoing footsteps in the dark, the bone-chilling cold, and the lingering terror still haunted her. She couldn't wait to find out what worse things might happen if she stayed. With no other place to go, the image of the woman Kiara had met weeks earlier flashed in her mind. That woman had given her a sandwich when she was starving, and though her vague offer had scared Kiara, she now thought the woman might be her only glimmer of hope. Maybe she'll help me. Maybe this time will be different, Kiara told herself, her small voice tinged with hesitation. With the last bit of courage she could muster, Kiara began walking, leaving behind the cold, desolate building and the terrifying memories it held. When Kiara found the woman at the old market, she still carried her glamorous demeanor and confident smile. She was leaning against a shiny car, her eyes scrutinizing the young girl as she approached. "Sweetheart, you finally came back," the woman said, her voice gentle yet laced with something that made Kiara uneasy. "I knew you'd return." Kiara lowered her head, trying to avoid the woman's gaze. I have nowhere else to go," she murmured. The woman smiled, a predatory grin like a hunter spotting its prey. "Don't worry, I'll help you. But you must understand, nothing in this world comes for free. You'll have to do things my way." This time, Kiara didn't question her like before. She nodded, even though her heart tightened with dread. The woman took Kiara to a small apartment in the south side of Chicago. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean and warm, with velvet-covered chairs and heavy curtains that blocked out the windows. To a little girl accustomed to the freezing cold of an abandoned building, the place felt like a palace. She gave Kiara food, new clothes, and a bed to sleep in. But the first days of peace were quickly shattered. "It's time for you to do your part," the woman said one evening, her eyes colder than before. Kiara began to realize her true intentions. The chores she assigned her were more than just cleaning the house or running errands. The woman began to use her for money, putting her in situations no child should have to go through. Every night, facing the woman's demands and judgmental eyes, Kiara's heart broke. The woman took Kiara to a small apartment on Chicago's south side. The apartment was not luxurious, but it was clean and warm, with velvet chairs and thick curtains covering the windows. For a girl accustomed to the cold of abandoned buildings, it was like a palace. She gave Kiara food, new clothes, and a bed to sleep in. But the first days of peace were quickly shattered. "It's time for you to do your part," the woman said one evening, her eyes colder than before. Kiara began to realize the woman's true intentions. The tasks she was given no longer stopped at cleaning the house or running errands. The woman started exploiting her to make money, placing her in situations no child should ever have to endure. Each night, as Kiara faced the woman's demands and her piercing, judgmental gaze, her heart broke a little more. But even in the darkest days, Kiara held on to a fragile thread of hope. On nights when she curled up on the small bed, she would remember her mother's words. "Kiara, you are a strong girl. Even if the world turns its back on you, you can still rise." The memories of her mother became her only source of strength to keep going. One night, after completing the tasks the woman had assigned her, Kiara stared out at the city lights from the apartment window. She told herself that no matter how hard it would be, she had to escape from this place. "Tomorrow I'll find a way to leave," she thought to herself. Her small hands clenched tightly as if to solidify her resolve. Kiara didn't know what awaited her out there, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't live like this forever. It was time to break free from the chains that bound her. That night, as the moonlight filtered through the curtains, Kiara closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she dreamed of a different future, a future where she could walk freely, no longer exploited or controlled. Kiara's story was far from over, but the first glimmer of light had begun to shine, a small spark of hope, but one strong enough to guide her on her journey to reclaim herself. At 18, Kiara arrived in Dallas, Texas, a city of opportunities and shimmering lights from its towering skyscrapers. But for her, this wasn't a journey to seek success. It was one to continue surviving. After years trapped in darkness, Dallas felt like a fresh page, a place to start over, even if life's challenges never ceased to test her. At a small gathering for business professionals, where Kiara had been invited by an acquaintance, she met James. He was a successful entrepreneur who had overcome hardship to build his career from the ground up. James, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit and carrying himself with quiet confidence, was captivated the moment his eyes met Kiara's. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, not just for her striking beauty, but because of her eyes filled with pain, yet unbroken. She had the magnetic presence of someone who had weathered many storms but still held on to her inner strength. "Would you like to talk for a bit?" James asked, his voice gentle yet sincerely inviting. Kiara hesitated briefly but nodded. Though she was someone who lived independently and always stayed cautious, she could sense James's sincerity. In the days that followed, James patiently approached Kiara. He wasn't just interested in her outward appearance. He wanted to understand the complex past she tried to hide. Gradually, Kiara began to open up, sharing with James the hardships of her life, the years she had fought just to survive, and even the things she had done to stay afloat. Instead of judging her, James felt his heart ache. In Kiara, he saw not just a young, beautiful woman, but a brave soul yearning for love and freedom. "You didn't deserve to go through all that," James said one day, his voice full of emotion. "I want to help you leave that life behind. You don't have to live like this anymore, Kiara." He rented a beautiful apartment in the heart of Dallas for her, a place Kiara could finally call home. The apartment was filled with natural light, offering a stunning view of the entire city. James didn't just provide financial support, he brought a level of care and attention Kiara had never experienced from anyone before. But no matter how much James tried, Kiara kept her distance. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of the apartment, gazing at the dazzling lights of Dallas, James took her hand. "Kiara," he said, his eyes serious yet gentle, "you don't have to do this anymore. I'll take care of you. We can start over, far away from everything that's caused you pain." James's words made Kiara's heart tremble slightly, but at the same time they stirred up a storm inside her. "You don't understand," Kiara replied, her voice firm yet filled with pain. "My whole life I've had to fight to survive. I can't let anyone take control of my life anymore. Even if you mean well, I can't rely on anyone." James fell silent, but the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. "That's not dependence, Kiara. That's love," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore." But Kiara was too used to facing everything on her own. She had built a wall around herself, an armor to shield her from the world, and she wasn't ready to let go of the independence she had paid such a heavy price to achieve. Even though Kiara rejected James's offer, he didn't give up. He stayed by her side, never forcing or demanding anything. Instead, he patiently waited, hoping that one day she would realize he wasn't trying to control her, but simply wanted to bring her the happiness she deserved. Every day, James took the time to listen and understand Kiara more deeply. He took her to places she had never been, introducing her to people who could help her find a new path. He didn't talk much about his feelings, but every action he took showed that he loved her, genuinely and unconditionally. Gradually, James's presence began to affect Kiara. Although she wouldn't admit it, she felt safe with him by her side. She started thinking about the future, about what she could achieve instead of what she had to do just to survive. One day, Kiara looked into James's eyes full of patience and love. And for the first time in years, she felt that she didn't have to fight alone anymore. "I'll try," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "Try what?" James asked, his eyes lighting up. "Try trusting you." And with those words, Kiara not only gave James a chance, but also granted herself a fresh start. A beginning where she no longer had to bear the weight of the world alone, but could walk alongside someone who truly loved her. James was the kind of man anyone would dream of being with. He was not only successful and sophisticated, but also possessed a genuine and warm heart. His love for Kiara knew no bounds. Fully aware that Kiara struggled to trust, James never stopped proving that he was willing to do whatever it took for her. But James's love wasn't just about romance. It was about heartbreaking sacrifice. He understood that Kiara had spent too long in the shadows, where every aspect of life was a battle. And out of love, James resolved to become the person Kiara needed. Someone who could make her feel loved and accepted without asking her to change. In the early days of their relationship, James did his best to bring Kiara a sense of safety and peace. Yet he quickly realized that Kiara was not easily satisfied. She was accustomed to controlling every aspect of her life, and that made her more guarded than ever. James, driven by his intense love for Kiara, began to change himself. He dressed more youthfully, worked out harder, and even started using supplements to meet Kiara's expectations in their relationship. "You don't need to do this," Kiara had once said, but her words weren't enough to deter James. "I want you to be happy," he replied, his eyes filled with determination. However, these changes affected more than just James's spirit. His physical health began to decline. He was no longer the strong, vibrant man he used to be. Yet his deep, passionate love for Kiara made him ignore the warning signs from his own body. One evening, in their beautiful apartment in downtown Houston, the city lights shimmered outside the window, but they couldn't dispel the growing darkness that was overtaking James. Kiara had just walked in from the living room when she saw James sitting on the chair, his face pale and his breathing labored. "James, are you okay?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. He gave her a faint smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired," he replied weakly. But only a few minutes later, James suddenly collapsed. The loud thud of his body hitting the floor sent Kiara into a panic. "James! James!" she screamed, rushing to his side and desperately shaking him, trying to wake him. No response. Kiara trembled, tears streaming down her face as she dialed for emergency services. "Please, someone help me. My boyfriend, he's not breathing." When the ambulance arrived, James was completely unconscious. Kiara stayed close to him as they rushed to the hospital, her heart feeling as though it was being crushed by worry and fear. She held his hand tightly, praying that everything would be okay. But as the doctors rushed him into the emergency room, she was forced to wait outside, helplessly watching through the glass. Time seemed to come to a standstill as she waited. Finally, a doctor emerged, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "We did everything we could," he said gently, his tone filled with regret, but his body couldn't hold on any longer. Kiara felt as if the ground beneath her feet had collapsed. "No, it can't be." She shook her head, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. Standing by the hospital bed, looking at James lying motionless with a peaceful expression on his face, Kiara felt her heart shatter into pieces. Memories of their days together came flooding back, but instead of bringing comfort, they only deepened her pain. She knew that James's love for her was real, but she also realized that her demands and unintentional expectations had pushed him to his limits. "If I hadn't been so selfish, if I hadn't let him change himself for me," she whispered, her voice breaking through the tears. A crushing sense of guilt weighed heavily on her, a burden she wasn't sure she could carry for much longer. James's death was a turning point in Kiara's life. For the first time, she understood that the independence she had always taken pride in wasn't always a virtue. "James gave me everything," she told herself, "but I didn't know how to cherish him." In the days that followed, Kiara began to reflect deeply on her life. She realized that love wasn't about control, but about acceptance and selflessness. James had shown her that she didn't have to fight alone forever, that sometimes the greatest strength comes from allowing others into your life. With memories of James in her heart, Kiara was determined to change. She knew she couldn't turn back time to save him, but she could make her life more meaningful, to honor the love James had given her. "You sacrificed everything for me," Kiara whispered, at James's grave on a sunny day. "Now I'll live, not just for myself, but for you as well." The news of James's sudden death shook not only his family but also the entire community. A strong, wealthy, and respected man was gone under mysterious circumstances. Yet no one was angrier than Lucas, James's only son. Lucas, who lived in New York, was a successful businessman like his father. However, unlike James, he was tough, unforgiving and skeptical of others. When he learned that his father's death involved Kiara, a young woman he had never heard of, Lucas didn't hesitate. He immediately booked a flight to Houston, determined to confront the woman he believed had destroyed his family. When Lucas arrived at the apartment where Kiara was staying, he didn't bother to hide his anger. Knocking forcefully on the door, he stood there, his face as cold as ice, with accusations boiling inside him. Kiara, her eyes still swollen from days of crying over her loss, opened the door. Seeing Lucas, she looked momentarily confused but not surprised. "Are you Kiara?" Lucas asked, his tone sharp as a blade. "Yes," she replied, trying to stay calm. Lucas stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across the room as if searching for evidence to confirm what he had heard. "I'm Lucas, James's son. I'm here to ask you one question. What did you do to my father?" Kiara felt as though her heart was being squeezed. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't lie to me," Lucas snapped, his voice echoing through the apartment. "My father was a strong man, but ever since he met you, he changed. He did everything for you, even destroyed himself. You took advantage of him, and now what? He's dead and you're still here, living in the apartment he paid for." Lucas's words cut through Kiara like knives. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she never intended to hurt James, but faced with Lucas's storm of anger, she felt too powerless to say anything. Lucas didn't stop at accusations. Determined to seek justice, he decided to take legal action against Kiara. Using his influence and connections, he reached out to authorities and accused her of exploiting his father's trust, even implying that she might have contributed to James's death. Just a few days later, the police arrived at the apartment and arrested Kiara. She had no opportunity to explain or defend herself. News of her arrest quickly spread, and Kiara was swept into a whirlwind of gossip and public judgment. "We have to take you in for questioning," one of the officers said as they handcuffed her. "But I didn't do anything wrong," Kiara pleaded, tears streaming down her face. When everything seemed to be falling apart, someone stepped forward to help her. Marcus, a young and passionate lawyer. He had learned about Kiara's case through a friend and immediately sensed that something wasn't right. Marcus visited Kiara in the detention center. He was a man with sharp yet warm eyes, and his voice carried a confidence Kiara had only ever seen in James. "Kiara, I'm here to help you," Marcus said, his tone gentle but filled with determination. Kiara looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll prove your innocence. I need you to trust me," Marcus replied, his eyes radiating certainty. Marcus began meticulously investigating every aspect of the case. He worked tirelessly day and night, gathering evidence, from medical testimonies confirming James's death was due to health issues, to witnesses who could attest that Kiara never intended to take advantage of him. Step by step, Marcus unraveled the false accusations Lucas had constructed. In court, he persuaded the jury that Kiara was not only innocent, but also a victim of circumstances. Lucas, though initially firm and unyielding, gradually became convinced by the irrefutable evidence. He had no choice but to withdraw his accusations. When the court declared Kiara innocent, she felt as if a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Yet instead of satisfaction, she was left with only pain and exhaustion. "Thank you, Marcus," she said as she stepped out of the courthouse. Marcus gave a gentle smile. "This is just the first step, Kiara. Now you need to rebuild your life." Looking up at the Houston sky, Kiara felt a faint glimmer of hope. James was gone, but the memories of him and all he had done for her would remain forever. With Marcus's help, she resolved to live a life that James would be proud of. "I won't let you down, James," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, but her heart filled with determination. As Kiara stepped out of the courthouse, the Houston sunlight seemed brighter than ever. But to her, it wasn't just the light of a new day. It was the light of freedom, a fresh start after years weighed down by pain, loss, and false accusations. Beside her stood Marcus, not just her lawyer, but the person who had reached out to help her when it felt like no one else was on her side. "Thank you," Kiara said, her voice soft but filled with deep gratitude. "Don't thank me," Marcus replied, his gaze steady and resolute. "Now is the time for you to stand tall and reclaim what's rightfully yours." With Marcus's support, Kiara decided to return to Chicago, the place where everything began and where her family had lost everything. The house her parents had cared for, the family assets that should have rightfully belonged to her, had all been taken away after their tragic deaths. Kiara remembered the happy days of her childhood in that house, the evenings when her mother braided her hair, the sound of her father's laughter as he lifted her onto his shoulders. Those memories were now not only a source of pain, but also her driving force to move forward. The legal battle was far from easy. Those who had taken her family's property were not willing to let it go without a fight. But Kiara was no longer the weak, frightened little girl she once was. She faced them with resilience, fueled by a determination to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for her parents as well. Marcus, with his sharp intellect and unwavering dedication, stood by her side in every court hearing. "We will win," he always told Kiara, and this time she believed him. After months of tension and sleepless nights, Kiara finally achieved victory. The court declared her the rightful heir to all her family's assets. It was an emotional moment as Kiara felt as though her parents had finally been given the justice they deserved. With her restored assets, Kiara didn't just want to restart her life. She wanted to make a difference, to help other young women who had faced struggles similar to hers. "Where do you think I should go?" Kiara asked Marcus one day as they sat in his law office. Marcus smiled. "Los Angeles. That place will offer you the opportunities and connections you need. And you deserve a fresh start in the city of dreams." Kiara arrived in Los Angeles with her heart full of hope and a clear plan. She didn't just want to find peace for herself. She wanted to create a space where young women, those who had been through what she once endured, could find support, empathy, and opportunities. Using her family's assets, Kiara purchased a small building in the heart of the city. From there, she began building the Kiara Women's Center, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping young women facing challenging circumstances. The Kiara Women's Center was more than just a shelter. It was a symbol of hope. The young women who came here not only found a place to stay, but also opportunities to learn new skills, develop themselves, and rebuild their lives. "We're not here just to survive," Kiara said on the center's grand opening day. "We're here to fight, to reclaim our worth, and to build a better future." Kiara's words resonated deeply with the young women seeking help and inspired everyone in attendance at the opening ceremony. Marcus, standing in the crowd, looked at Kiara with immense pride. From a little girl who had lost everything, Kiara had transformed into someone who now brought hope to others. Every day she worked at the center, she remembered James and all that he had done to help her rise again. "Every action I take today," she told Marcus, "is to honor him and to never forget that he believed I could achieve something great." Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with encouragement. "Kiara, you've come further than anyone ever imagined, but the most important thing is that you believed in yourself." Kiara stood on the balcony of the center one late afternoon, watching the sunset stretch across Los Angeles. She knew her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. "I've survived, but now I want to live a life that's truly worthy," Kiara whispered to herself, her eyes shining with determination. From that moment on, Kiara's life was no longer just a story of struggle. It became a story of rebirth, courage, and the will to overcome adversity to make a difference in the world. From a lost girl wandering the cold and dangerous streets, Kiara rose above adversity to find happiness, love, and a greater purpose in life. Her wedding ceremony with Marcus in Santa Monica was not just a celebration of love, but a symbol of rebirth, a testament to those who believe that no matter how challenging life gets, there is always a chance to change. Lucas, who once misunderstood and blamed Kiara, eventually came to see the truth. He not only apologized, but also became a part of her healing journey. This serves as a reminder that even the most wounded hearts, when willing to open up, can find forgiveness and peace. If you're part of the African American community, you inherit a rich and powerful cultural legacy. A heritage that is not just a memory, but also a treasure trove of valuable life lessons. Stories like Kiara's not only connect us to the past, but also help preserve and share these meaningful values with future generations. Let's come together to listen to, share, and spread stories like this with our friends, family, and communities across the United States. Each story is not just a lesson, but a part of our heritage that we must preserve and celebrate with pride. If Kiara's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Thank you for joining us on this journey to preserve and share our cultural heritage.